So Lynn, when we're thinking a little bit about online discussion, what are some things that come to mind for you with regards to some best practices?
We know how important discussion is for the learning process, that it's really an exchange of ideas. And so as part of that, really scaffolding it in a way that's really going to encourage an actual exchange, at where kids, students, your participants, whatever level you're at, are really pushing on each other's thinking. They're formulating their own thoughts. They're expanding their thoughts. And so best practice number one, establishing really clear expectations of what you're looking for when it comes to discussion, the exchange of ideas, kind of the norms of how that's all going to look. I mean, that's, in my mind, kind of step number one.
Yeah, for sure. Establishing, your norms, expectations. I think that's important in that online environment, as well as, when we're physically together. Another thing that comes to mind for me is, how do we create entry points for our students that might, this might not be like a natural task for them to contribute to an online discussion board. And so how do we provide them like sentence stems or prompts for thinking or things like that that can help them engage with that?
Yeah, and to piggyback off of that, just, I know for myself, I have to have processing time. And so as part of that scaffolding and minimizing threats, I think about things like providing that personal processing time before asking kids to engage in any sort of discussion with their classmates. And I also think about minimizing threats where you're giving them entry points, like you were talking about, Gina, of engaging in the conversation in ways that maybe slowly but surely baby step them into comfort, having some discussion prompts that are maybe low stakes, but then also thinking about the fact that you're transitioning to this digital environment, that perhaps, giving kids an opportunity to actually like engage with the platform itself and just kind of figure out how all that works too. Just those things that you can do to help scaffold the process. Mm-hmm. Those are huge.
Yeah. And I think that too, we also have to think about, so what sort of environment are the online discussions happening in? And what I mean by that is, are those online discussions happening in a synchronous format where everyone is together in the same place, like the same Zoom call, for example, or the same Google Meet at the same time, having a discussion about something? Or is it happening in an asynchronous format, meaning that people kind of tap in and join in the conversation at their leisure on like a discussion board? So for example, a discussion topic in an LMS like Canvas.
Yeah. And, when you're thinking about those things, one of the pieces as we transition those discussion skills into that online learning environment, like Gina was talking about, whether you're thinking it's synchronous or asynchronous, one of our biggest recommendations is to kind of start with what you know. If you're already using a platform that, for example, if we're talking synchronous, so that face-to-face, if you're already connecting with your students via Zoom, think about how you can scaffold conversations within Zoom, perhaps using the chat feature, perhaps establishing those norms of turning microphones on and off, to exchange ideas, or even leveraging breakout rooms, for example. Same thing with Google Meet, just trying to leverage the built-in features that are already part of the platform that you're engaging in with your student, because it's one less thing for them to familiarize themselves with.
Yeah, for sure. And there is built into Zoom too, there's that raise your hand feature. And so it alerts the facilitator that someone has a question or someone wants to participate. And then there's also those reactions. So the like high five 10, I think it is, and the thumbs up. You can only react positively in Zoom. It's a 100% positive environment. So, but making sure that your participants or your students, whoever's in that online Zoom meeting, are aware of those features will help move that online discussion along more smoothly. And I liked what you said, Lynn, about leveraging something or leveraging those breakout rooms that are in Zoom as well, which actually preview to tomorrow. They are going to be focusing, Jonathan and Lynn again, are going to be focusing on breakout rooms tomorrow.
Shameless plug.
Shameless plug. So if you're interested in learning more about that, tune in tomorrow. That got me also thinking a little bit about asynchronous discussion opportunities and how to maybe make the circle a little bit smaller within those asynchronous discussion opportunities. And so one thing that I know teachers that I've worked with that are secondary teachers have talked a lot about is creating discussion groups within Canvas so that it's just a smaller number of people that you have to keep track of and respond to versus having a really, really, really long threaded discussion. So rather than having 15 people that are all chiming in and you're trying to track the discussion and respond to them, maybe have the discussion, those discussion groups be only like 5 people.
Right. Kind of providing a little bit more space for an exchange of ideas. And I think about, you're exactly right, Gina, there's a lot of platforms that already have built-in pieces to it, like you were talking about Canvas. And I think about Google Classroom, for example, either through the commenting features or the question feature where you can pose a question. And I personally really like it because it makes me pause and reflect first, because you can set it up so you have to answer the question first, or your students have to answer the question first before they see what their classmates have answered, because it gives them that little mental space to process. But then you can encourage an exchange of ideas where kids can reply back and forth to their classmates. They can go back and refine their original response. So there's some pieces where you can, in essence, prime the pump for those moments when you are joining together synchronously, but you're providing those opportunities for kids to collaborate when they're not face-to-face. And I think about, as an elementary librarian, you can keep it super simple. We used Google Docs, and we would, through Google Classroom, but it wouldn't have to be shared that way, we assigned small groups of kids into a template of sorts to exchange in a discussion on a book. And across the top, we just had each kid pick a color, and their responses, we started off and we scaffolded the conversation by providing a prompt, and the kids responded in their color. And so it was a great way to kind of start to introduce in a low stakes environment with something that they were already familiar. So it doesn't have to be anything complex. It can be simple.
Yeah. I liked what you were saying about like using discussion as a entry point or an introduction into a next learning task, or almost like that, to go Madeline Hunter on everybody, like an anticipatory set, if you will, or an anticipation guide. And so some way that we're drawing out like our prior knowledge of a topic or our prior thinking around a topic. And then having kids engage in it, or engage with that thinking around that there. So Jonathan, has anyone joined us today? And is anyone chiming in about some ideas or best practices for online discussion? We'd love to hear what folks are doing right now.
Yeah, we got lots of people in the call so far. No questions as yet, though, but I will let you guys know as soon as they come up.
Yeah.
Okay.
As Gina said, we would love to hear kind of what you're doing as you're scaffolding those conversations with your kids. Jonathan, I think, is going to be dropping in a resource page that we provided for you to kind of think about all of those things that Gina and I just tossed out, all of those ideas, providing you with some resources where you can go in and explore and revisit. Once again, thinking about using what you've got in a different way.
Yes, for sure. And on that doc, there are some best practices there. I think there's there's one really good article from, I think it's called EDUCAUSE, that talks very specifically about some 10 tips for structuring online discussions. And they're really focusing a lot more on those asynchronous online discussions or discussion forums. And then there was also linked in that article, and then also linked on the little doc that we put together on online discussions. There is kind of a doc that a teacher has developed that is almost like a contract or collective commitments document that he has all of his students take a look at and sign, basically, that says, hey, this is what we're looking for in online discussions. And so I think that it's that might be really helpful, I guess, piece to incorporate in your classroom if you are having your students engage in online discussions.
So we did have one question that came in so far, and that was from Maggie, wondering if these best practices you put together for students, if any of those can also apply to adult learners too?
Yes, I would say for sure. I think one thing that I have learned in facilitating online discussions with adult learners is that you have to make that discussion topic or that discussion, whatever it is, that online discussion, authentic to the online learners and engaging, and sometimes almost even controversial, if you will. Like, so having them engage with some thinking around a scenario that might crop up in their classroom, or a scenario that has cropped up in a classroom and how they'd respond to it. I think that feels more authentic than, read this and respond to it. I mean, that can work, but maybe providing a little bit more focus for that discussion or some more authenticity to it helps those online discussions and makes them feel more fun for the participants. But yes, I would say the best practices definitely spread or go across the gamut of learners, from our younger ones to our older ones.
All right, should we move on and look at our first tool?
Yeah,
Who's
for
up
sure.
first?
I think it's Lynn.
Yes. So at the bottom of that resource document, we recognize that there are some times where you might want something a little bit more robust, or maybe something a little bit more structured to scaffold that conversation, whether you're using it before a synchronous connection or after. So we recognize that there are a multitude of different resources out there that can do this, but Gina, Jonathan, and I kind of picked two in particular to highlight. And so I'm going to start first with one called Kialo. I will be totally honest and transparent. This is a fairly new one for me. It came across our radar thanks to Gina Rogers. It is one that I think has tremendous potential for students. And so I'm going to kind of do a quick little crash course demo. I'm not going to take you through the minutia of all of it, but just kind of giving you more of a sense of what the platform's about and kind of how it works. I know Jonathan is going to drop in a link so that you can follow along. But once again, on that resource doc, there are some links to talk you through exactly like how do you set up your account and how do you set up a discussion and things like that. But for our purposes, I'm going to share my screen here with us. And so once you navigate your way to kialo-edu.com, you set up an account. It's free to do. It can sync with your Google account, and then you enter into your landing page in essence. And so this is where you get to craft the experience for your students. So there's a button here that says create. Just for the sake of time today, I've kind of stepped us through this process. The create button, when you launch that, it actually goes through and it provides you with two options. One is to have a discussion with a single thesis, or one that has multiple pieces, because what Kialo actually is a platform to scaffold classroom debates. And so one of the things I would definitely recommend, and I think with the Kialo support pages too, they recommend you start off entry point to this experience with the one singular thesis. So it guides you through the whole practice of setting up your question. It guides you through, like, if you want to add, you can add some instructions or some additional links. So for the sake of time, I crafted one for us that is the single thesis. And so from here, basically, we've got the single thesis, and then your students can go through and put in their responses either in a pro column, so in support of this statement or the question that you're asking, or a con. So it's pretty simple to use. You click on the plus and you add in. So this is just one. I happen to work with the social studies team at Grantwood. And so for me, my mind went immediately to that social studies piece and thinking about the compelling questions that are part of the new social studies standards. So for example, I could put in a response, yes, people make the conscious, nothing like typing and watching have people judge your spelling. They make the conscious choice to move, okay? So with this, I then can click save. I can put in a link if I want to. And so then right there, we have our first argument. So what's kind of cool about this is additionally, you'll notice that it's branching here. One of the things I really like about Kialo is it keeps the whole conversation, the debate, super organized. And right across this top is a navigation piece. So for example, if I click on this response now, you'll notice it now opens it up where if I was sharing this with students, I could have them, they could respond to each other and go in and add a continued pro argument, or they can add now a con argument. And so I could say, there are times when it is not a choice for people to move. And so they would save that there. And so you'll notice if I scroll back up to the top, it's now branching the conversation so people can follow it, your students can follow along. For myself as a teacher, I can come in and I've got a couple different pieces. These menus look fairly similar for students as well. If I click on the three buttons, I can go through and because I created this one, I can edit it. I can go through, and the voting stats piece is pretty interesting. As the debate is getting close to the end, your students can go in and they can vote on the impact of the argument. And so of course you can scaffold that with how compelling their particular reason was, and it actually moves it up in the conversation, which is pretty cool. There's a couple other pieces where you can go in if you are participating. I'll show you what this looks like. If you're participating as a student, you can like the author, you can give them some positive encouragement that you really appreciated the arguments that they were making. But once again, as a teacher, I could go in and I could write a comment to my students. And so I might put in something like, to scaffold their rationale, can you provide a specific example? Which then is sent to that participant and they can kind of follow along. So one of the things I also like about Kialo is that within this, they give some examples. There are some lesson plans that start the prompt. So if you're kind of questioning where to begin with this, that's how you can scaffold in on that. The other piece is once you've created your original thesis, the other part is, you don't want me participating by myself, having my own personal debate. You want to extend it obviously to your students. And so the sharing piece, you can then invite participants either via a link or directly by email. So one of the caveats to Kialo is that it is for students 13 years or older. So 8th grade-ish, you'd have to be mindful of the age of your students on up. But with that sharing, in order for the students to participate, they do actually have to create a Kialo account, but then it will link into your particular debate. There's a couple other features of Kialo that would be worth exploring. There's a piece where you can invite participants to a team, so you can group students. So there's a lot of powerful potential to Kialo. So this is an example debate, and you're kind of seeing how many participants along this right-hand side. There's some other pieces for you as a teacher that kind of helps you navigate and watches the activity. You can filter by the participant, who actually has engaged in the conversations. There's some other features that, once again, on that support document, kind of gives you all of the pieces of navigating the platform itself. But just talking about the powerful potential of how you could use Kialo to really help your kids engage in a conversation around a topic. Once again, either prior to a synchronous conversation or maybe even after, to allow them to continue to process. Once again, my mind went straight to the social studies example of, thinking about the compelling questions, and when you are crafting your thoughts and gathering your pieces of evidence, having kids go back and forth with rationales. I think it's huge and has powerful potential.
Yeah. As you were showing this, Lynn, my mind went to one of our AEA online resources, which is the SIRS issue resource, or SIRS issue researcher. And so in that, they have kind of like different issues or whatever outlined, and they break that issue into pro-con arguments. And I think it would be really interesting to either use Kialo as like a anticipatory or beginning activity before exploring some of those resources, or having students look at some of those and then chime in on a pro-con debate. Or maybe they even like have some different teams that are pro teams, con teams, and they really have to dive in and get some deep knowledge or develop some deep knowledge about that side of the argument or that side of the topic.
Yeah. Oh, and even within that voting piece of the impact, putting some of those in and having students vote them up, but they would have to explain why they voted that particular argument up. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential to really enrich a conversation in a multitude of different ways.
Yeah. So Jonathan, are there any questions or any comments on the Kialo?
Quick question. Is this a free tool or a freemium tool or anything like that you can clarify for us?
Well, at this point in time, it is free. Obviously, sometimes there's an evolution of things, but currently it is free. Not just in COVID times.
All right. So I guess we'll transition quickly to Parler, and I'll give just a quick overview of that. So this is another online discussion platform that you might choose to use. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. And so Parler is a place where you can set up classes. So similar maybe to Google Classroom or whatnot, you would create a new class and then enroll your participants in that class. So you then would be able to set up some different discussions. And so if I click on Create New here, online roundtable, I can create my own. So maybe I have my own topic that I want to start from scratch with some, stimulus or items that I want the kids, or resources that I want the kids to access before they start discussing. Or I can go into the Parler universe and browse some pre-developed discussion topics. So since what we looked at in Kialo was a lot of build your own, we're going to just jump into the Parler universe real quick so you can see some of the types of topics that are available there. So I'm going to browse the universe quick. So what I love about the Parler universe is that all of these discussions are broken down by subject. And so if I click on that, I can refine my search by subject area. So social studies, science, English, whatever. Let's go into maybe in digital citizenship and journalism and media. Let's see what they have in there. And so is ad-based revenue model in media ethical. So this looks like actually kind of interesting discussion or an interesting thing to, I guess, engage with. So if I click on that.
We do have a journalism teacher in the chat watching right now, so this is a good topic to pick, Gina.
Do I know the journalism teacher?
You might.
All right. So in here, we have this roundtable. So we have learning goals. So exactly what it is or why we're having kids engage with this topic just outlined here. We have those discussion questions that we want the kids to think about. And then we have some parameters for peer feedback. So once we're ready, we go ahead and hit create roundtable. And then we'll assign it to a course. And so I'm just going to assign it to my first course, create roundtable. And then I would invite my students to engage in this course. I can push it out via a link. I can invite them directly, or I can push it out via Google Classroom. I'm going to click out of here, and we're going to get into one that we have already put some responses and comments into. And so the really interesting thing or neat thing about Parler is when your students join your class, they are assigned like a pseudonym. So they're assigned a like fictitious identity. So you don't know who's responding or who has posted what comment. And so in this particular discussion, I was Robert Schumann. I think Jonathan and Lynn were these people as well. And what's interesting is that you can, as a participant in the discussion, you can look and get a little background on who that person is. As a teacher, so I'm here on the teacher side, if I click on this eyeball, I'll be able to see who has contributed what. But if I want to anonymize it for feedback purposes, I can do that as well. We can see kind of what this looks like. I can respond or assess these different responses. From a student perspective, let me flip over to my other window. Escape out of here. It looks pretty similar. And so there's a place where I would be able to leave a comment. Now, what's neat about Parler too is that when I set up those student comments or student parameters for feedback, they build those stems in anytime I get ready to leave a comment. So here are some things to think about. Did this person change my perspective in any way? Do you agree or disagree with their plan? Why or why not? A different approach might be blah, blah, blah. And so I think that there's just some interesting pieces that are built in here to really help support learners in responding. And then also, like, I think that piece of anonymizing student identities is really interesting as well. Now, Parler is a tool that is it is normally a freemium tool, if you will. I believe you get 4 online discussions or roundtables for free before you have to start paying for it. Now, in the time of school closures, they have gone free until the end of the school year or the end of school closures. And so there is linked, I think in the comments and then also on our resource doc, a place where you can get some more information about how to get the full online version or full premium online version of Parler. Another interesting piece of Parler, and this isn't going to be modeled super well because we don't have a lot of responses within this online discussion, is this summary view. And so as a teacher and a student, I can get a quick, just 10,000 foot overview of the discussion, kind of what it looked like, how many people have responded, what's the average word length of the responses. So then maybe a little word cloud of like the biggest ideas that are coming up. I can mark model submissions as well. And then this is really interesting because it creates kind of like a comment heat map where you can track like the conversations that are happening between the different participants within the Parler discussion. Parler also has a live discussion option as well. And so this is for when we're back together with our students in a face-to-face environment. You can set up a live roundtable, and it does allow you to kind of, monitor or take a look at the interactions that are happening. It also has this tap in to the discussion feature. So the kids all have kind of their devices up. They're engaged in this live online or this live discussion. When they have something they want to share, they say tap in, and then they go to next in line to share. And it kind of allows kids a visual to say, oh, there's someone that wants to share, if they're not picking up on the nonverbal kind of clues that I have something I'd like to share. I think that's interesting piece as well to Parler. It's a rich tool, definitely worth exploring a little bit more. Are there any questions in the chat at all?
There are currently no questions.
Okay, cool. So definitely take a look at Parler, explore this one on your own. There is a lot of resources to help get you started. They have a YouTube channel with a bunch of videos to help get you started and some different get started guides as well. I'll jump out of here and we'll just bring us back together. So Lynn, do you have any real final closing thoughts on online classroom discussions?
I would just say, I know we modeled Kialo and Parler, and that they are for, upper middle school, high school. And they're absolutely amazing platforms, but just remembering and reminding those elementary friends that, you can scaffold in with some of those platforms that you've already got, Google Docs or Classroom or even Seesaw. Thinking about how you can open up the commenting features for students to be able to participate back and forth. And I think the biggest piece is no matter what platform, what tool you're using for your discussion, is revisiting those best practices and just really starting with creating an environment where there can be that exchange of ideas and minimizing the threats, thinking about the different pieces of the puzzle of building relationships with kids and allowing them to feel comfortable in a multitude of different ways to exchange ideas. Any sage words of advice on your end, Gina?
I don't think so. I just think that it's so important for us to get our kids to engage with each other around academic content too, because learning is social. And so, and right now, I think that might be one of the pieces. In fact, I know based upon the learners in my classroom, my house. So I know based upon the learners in my house that's one of the things that they're really missing is engaging with their peers and processing and developing and constructing knowledge through classroom discussion. And so having an opportunity to engage with their peers, the people in their classroom around content is so important for helping students make meaning. So I think
well
that
said,
might be,
Gina.
Yeah, learning is social. So, all right. Mic drop, and we're done. So I think, unless there's any final comments or questions in the chat, Jonathan, we might be done for today. If there is something that does come up, if you're watching us at a later time, please drop a comment in the video that's shared on our page, and we'll definitely get back to you. So,
and a shameless plug for tomorrow. Jonathan, do you want to give them a little heads up of what's coming tomorrow?
Sure. Tomorrow we are back again in the afternoon. I think is it 3 p.m., Lynn?
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to be looking at Zoom breakout rooms and how you could use those as part of synchronous learning and online discussions as well. I would guess there's going to be some overlap with some of the things we do here, but thinking more about the logistics of doing that in a synchronous environment. I think today's tools were largely asynchronous, so flipping it over to the other side and seeing what that looks like.
Great. All right. Well, until tomorrow, when you guys will be back, I guess we'll see you later. So bye.
Thank you.